Jason McNew of Appalachian Technologies here, and this is Security Snark, where we discuss all the cybersecurity news that's worth discussing. This week on Security Snark, researchers detail 17 malicious frameworks used to attack air-gapped networks. We have a report here on insulin pump management vulnerability, which is kind of spooky. CISA has released a framework which is really important on how to secure your mobile devices. We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about a critical Wormable security flaw that's found in a bunch of HP printers. First up this week comes this piece from the Hacker News. Researchers detail 17 malicious frameworks used to attack air-gapped networks. And when they say air-gapped, what they mean is a system that is not connected to the internet. It's not connected to a larger network. It's not connected to the internet. And air-gapped systems, we tend to find these on highly secured systems. Classified systems, for example. One way that we might operate a classified secret or top secret type system is to maintain it on a laptop that's kept locked in a safe. That is an example of an air-gapped network. And there's other ones. You might have a bunch of machines that are connected together with a switch and servers and stuff like that. But again, they're not connected to the internet, and that makes them air-gapped. Now, one example of this that's going to come to mind in the news for me right off the top of my head is going to be Stuxnet, right? The attack on the Iranian nuclear enrichment program. Those systems now, in the public, we don't know a whole lot about them. We only know about, well, I haven't seen the classified reports on that one. And if I couldn't say anything. But based on what we know about that, that was an air-gapped system that was attacked using USB sticks that were seeded with these Iranian scientists somehow. So that's what this framework is talking about. This particular one deals with USB attacks. These are what we would call a side channel attack. And there are other types of side channel attacks besides just USB. When I worked in the classified realm, we got briefings on some of these things. This gets into, kind of cloak and dagger stuff. Ways to monitor communications in a room with a laser by monitoring the vibration of the glass, or clipping sensors onto wires going into a building to see what somebody's typing, that kind of stuff. There's ways to record the audio of a keyboard typing and then reconstruct what's being typed on it. There's all kinds of interesting ways that these are definitely ATP, advanced persistent threat type attacks. But the main point is here, air-gapped systems typically are going to be much more secure than a non-air-gapped system. Anything is connected to the network. But it doesn't mean that they're completely invulnerable. And if you use them to protect, cicada or some type of industrial secrets or something like that, there are still other protocols that you need to follow to make sure that these systems are secure. Just air-gapping them alone is not enough to keep them away from the bad guys. Interesting article here from the Hacker News. It reminds me a lot of my own background because we dealt with a lot of this stuff at the White House. And next up comes this piece from scmagazine.com. And this says, report insulin pump management vulnerability could enable device takeover. Medical device, they do have vulnerabilities. Now, this sounds bad, but this article is mainly talking about kind of a theoretical type of attack. And this goes into some fairly technical jargon that describes encryption and nonces and those kinds of things and the range of the device. And this is an attack that they did in the lab, right? So this is something that was done in a lab environment. And it's not an attack that's been weaponized, and there's no knowledge of it being used in the real world or anything like that. So it's scary, though, because an attack on an insulin device or a pacemaker or, something like maybe one of these sleep apnea devices that they're implanting, it's important to make sure that these things are secure, right? And because of the form factor and the size of them and the batteries, there's only so many resources that are available on these things. So the researchers aren't exactly sure why this thing was designed this way. Evidently, it communicates within a very limited range without using any encryption, which means that the payload could be observed and then it could be redeployed for a man-in-the-middle attack or something like that. So this is interesting. It's scary, but it's not as interesting and scary as it sounds to me. I don't think, because again, like I said, it's something that was done in a lab environment. These are geeks and lab coats doing this kind of stuff. There's no record of it being weaponized yet, but it does show that it's theoretically possible. It's theoretically possible to attack medical devices, and B, it shows that there are devices out in the wild, so to speak, that people are wearing around that could be attacked. So, a threat is probability times impact. So the impact of an attack like this would be very, very high. Imagine if you attack somebody's pacemaker, you could, theoretically kill them. Now the question is what is the probability of that? And I don't think that anybody knows that. But we'll continue to follow developments within this particular the medical device security space as they unfold. Here's an interesting one here from semagazine.com that's worth reading. And next up from SecurityWeek.com, CISA, that's a cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency, releases guidance on securing enterprise mobile devices. And for a lot of companies, we've done a lot of assessments, vulnerability assessments, where BYOD, bring your own device, mobile, laptops, tablets, IoT devices, and other things that might connect to the Wi-Fi. They're kind of a blind spot, and they don't always do a good job managing those things. And they introduce a lot of uncontrolled risk, a lot of uncontrolled IT risk into an organization. So it's important to have a plan in place to manage those things. And a lot of times we'll find, though, especially with BYOD, if BYOD is permitted, that it's not managed at all. And there's all sorts of uncontrolled risk with that. But in any case, they've come up with something they called the EMM, or the Enterprise Mobility Management Checklist, and it's meant to help businesses mitigate vulnerabilities and increase overall enterprise protection by implementing a series of best practices for securing enterprise managed mobile devices. So when it comes to these kinds of things, most things in IT and cybersecurity, you don't have to invent the wheel on your own. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. There's usually going to be some type of a framework or a checklist or a guide or something that you can go to and then implement on your own and make it your own policy, and then deploy that across your enterprise. And of course, you can always tweak these policies in order to as a best fit for your own organization. But this is just one more resource, and I've been seeing these on a fairly routine basis coming out of NIST and CISA and some other things. And the reason why this is happening is because mobile is definitely a target for hackers and the bad guys. So here's a guide on SecurityWeek.com coming from CISA that's going to help you with getting this stuff secured. Very, very important. Another great resource, and I recommend reading that. And finally, from the Hacker News, this piece, critical Wormable security flaw found in several HP printer models. And HP printers are very common in the enterprise, and they tend to have a pretty long service life. I've seen those things. We used to take these HP 4100s to the desert and then bring them back and then dump the sand out of them and put them back on the network. They're indestructible, those things. I don't think they're quite as good anymore, but the point is you could have a printer on your network for a long time, and they don't always get patched or monitored or maintained in any way. They tend to just get plugged in and then kind of ignored, and they are an attack vector. And if you're a big enough enterprise, in the military, we would have under the STIGs, the Security Technical Implementation Guides, the DISA STIGs. For security best practice, we put all the printers on their own VLAN and then segregate their traffic, because we know that they're potential attack vectors, and if you gain a toehold into a printer, that you could then theoretically move laterally through the network. So again, this is part of your configuration management and device identification. As part of your cybersecurity program, you need to identify everything that's on your network, including your printer, so that they can be managed. And we know that flaws in these things pop up from time to time, and we have to assume that patches aren't always going to be available, or that we're not going to get them deployed, or that they might not. There's all kinds of problems with these things. So assume the printers are not secure, and then put them on your network accordingly. Monitor them, maintain them, keep them separate, and then subscribe to security alerts from the manufacturers of these things as well. So that's all we have for this week on Security Snark.